So we start our next session now, which is going to be devoted to solutions for inclusive, green, and resilient cities. So each and every one of you who came to the Taj Palace today was probably stuck in traffic. There are a lot of people in Delhi. And that trend is only going to grow, not just in cities like Delhi, but in other urban centers around the world. And it's a growing trend, and we have to prepare for it because it's going to put a lot of pressure on our environment and the cities, and we have to make them more resilient and plan for the future. And so as we discuss this important development and this important challenge, I'd like to introduce our keynote address, which is going to be given by Mr. Takehiko Nakao, who's the president of the Asian Development Bank, and I'd like to welcome him here. Thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Pachauri is going to introduce him.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my proud privilege to introduce President Nakao, who is with us for the second time at the Delhi Sustainable Development Summit, and we greatly appreciate his presence. Just to introduce him will take a long time, but I'm going to be very brief. As I said, he's the president of the Asian Development Bank and the chairperson of the ADB's Board of Directors. He was elected president by the ADB's Board of Governors and assumed office in April 2013. Before joining the ADB, Mr. Nakao was the Vice Minister of Finance for International Affairs at the Ministry of Finance of Japan. Now, he's had a career spanning more than 3 decades, and he's held several senior positions in the Ministry of Finance in Japan, which he joined in 1978. He was assigned as Minister of the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C. between 2005 and 2007. And from 1994 to 1997, he served as economist and advisor at the International Monetary Fund. He's published several books, numerous papers on financial and economic issues, and in 2010 and 2011 was a visiting professor at the University of Tokyo, which, as you know, is one of the highest ranking universities in the world. I also want to highlight the fact that President Nakao has championed the midterm review of ADB Strategy 2020. So he is focusing on the period up to 2020, which goes beyond the immediate, and for meeting the challenges of a transforming Asia-Pacific region. As you know, the Asia-Pacific region is by far the most dynamic region in the world today. And he's focusing on 10 priorities: poverty reduction, inclusive economic growth, environment, and climate change, which I salute him for. He's also focusing on infrastructure development, middle-income countries, private sector development and operations, and knowledge solutions. And of course, there are some changes that he's bringing about within the ADB, but he's been leading the charge to increase ADB's financing capacity. And from having interacted with a number of multilateral development banks, I can say ADB has a unique merit in not only coming up with intellectually sound solutions, but those that are very valid at the grassroots level. So I am very grateful that President Nakao is here with us. I want to just quote something that he said with respect to the merger of the Asian Development Bank fund operations and ordinary capital resources balance sheet. And all this will be to enhance ADB's lending capacity. To quote him, he said, "This merger will significantly expand our capacity to support poor countries, enhance our risk-bearing capacity, and strengthen our preparedness for any future economic crisis or natural disaster." And in that, I'm sure he's including the impacts of climate change, which of course are the most profound as far as the lives of the poor are concerned. President Nakao, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pacioli, and I'm sorry to keep you before the lunch, which I'll offer incidentally. I'm very happy to come back to the SDS meeting here, and I just went to Nepal until yesterday and had a very good discussion with the Prime Ministers and other officials, and I may see Prime Minister Modi this evening. I'm so struck by the convergence of ideas among Asian leaders about the importance of market reforms, cutting red tapes, and also the importance of sustainability of the economy, including climate changes policies and also the sustainability in terms of inclusiveness of societies, including genders and so on. So I'm impressed by the strong commitment by the leaders of today in Asia, and although there are a lot of discussions about the anxieties or uncertainties of the world economy and world politics in Middle East, Africa, Europe, and Ukraine, but as far as Asia is concerned, because of democratic transitions in India and Indonesia, in Sri Lanka, and also reform efforts by countries like India, I think the state of Asian economy, state of union of Asia is strong and promising. That's what I really want to say after I visited Nepal and the opportunity of seeing leaders of India today. So I'll go to my speech, and I'd like to speak today about solutions for inclusive, green, and resilient cities. But before getting into that discussion, I'd like to touch on today's agenda, sustainable development goals and dealing with the climate change. This year, 2015, will be a very important year because of sustainable development goals, which will be finalized in this fall, and also prospects for a new global climate agreement. Agreement of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, and the post-2015 agenda is expected to be reached at the September United Nations Summit in New York. At the same time, in December, a new climate deal is also expected to be agreed at COP21 in Paris. About the SDGs, in July 2014, the UN Open Working Group on the SDGs delivered the final report. The SDGs place environmental and social sustainability at the core of new integrated development agendas. At the same time, the SDGs aim to eradicate extreme poverty and tackle other unfinished business of Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, by 2030, including for education and health, which were discussed just before this session. Economic transformation will be key to achieving many of these goals. The global development community is now finalizing the SDGs. ADB supports key proposals of the SDGs. I want to stress 3 points about the transition from MDGs to the SDGs. First, we still need to fully achieve the MDGs agenda. Second, poverty and inclusive growth cannot be set aside on environmental grounds. Third, but at the same time, neither can the environment be neglected in the pursuit of growth. Along with the SDGs, there was a big progress forward in climate change front. The international community has never been so close to agreeing on a global deal on climate change involving all the important players. Intensive negotiations are ongoing in the lead up to COP21 in Paris in coming December. The Lima call for climate change action agreed at COP20 last December provides the framework for several elements of the new agreement and establishes ground rules on how nations can submit their contribution to the climate change. Countries also agreed to raise adaptation to the same level as mitigation action. The issue of climate finance will be critical for the new agreement. Recent pledging for Green Climate Fund is encouraging signal. Of course, developed countries need to show leadership in global climate actions, including finance, technological innovations, and technical transfer to developing countries. At the same time, developing countries will make contributions according to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. I believe ADB and other multilateral development banks should make a key contribution to financing both SDGs and global climate actions. In doing so, we should pay special attention to the roles of multilateral development banks of catalyzing public and private resources in addition to our own financing. Now, I'd like to go to the main topic of my discussion today, which is solution for inclusive, green, and resilient cities. Cities are the key to meeting both SDGs and the global climate goals. The proposal for SDGs identified sustainable urban development as a critical area of focus. Several SDGs call for actions mainly in urban areas where most economic activities and investments take place. And the cities are where much of the climate mitigation and adaptation action will have to take place. Actually, cities have driven economic growth in Asia, now producing about 80% of GDP in Asia, and have lifted tens of millions of poverty, especially in the past 2 decades. Asia is the most rapidly urbanizing region in the world. More than half of the world's largest cities are in Asia. By 2050, 3 billion people, about 60% of all Asians, will live in cities. The urbanization process should be in tandem with further economic growth and poverty reduction. However, there are challenges, 3 kinds. First, rapid urbanization also means the urbanization of poverty. Of a total about 1.6 billion urban people in Asia, more than 5 million people living in high-density degraded slums. Asia accounts for about 60% of the world's slum dwellers. Large disparities have emerged in urban areas, and the poor are the most vulnerable to economic and environmental shocks. It is clear that the way cities are developed and managed will heavily influence efforts to eradicate poverty in Asia. Second, environmental sustainability remains a major concern. As cities swell in size and numbers, they are under increasing environmental stress. Cities struggle with air and water pollution, traffic congestion, inadequate solid waste management, and wastewater treatment. Only about 10% of solid waste ends up in properly managed landfill sites. Current levels of investment in water, sanitation, housing, and other urban infrastructure are not sufficient to cope with such a rapid urbanization process. Third, vulnerability to climate change should also be addressed. Rapid and often poorly managed urbanization intensifies climate change risks and amplifies its impact on infrastructure. Asian cities are especially vulnerable to the hazards caused by climate change. 238 million Asian urban poor are expected to be hit first and hardest. Natural disasters routinely raise 1% to 5% of GDP each year, and this figure is increasing. Several Asian cities, including Dhaka, Kolkata, Mumbai, Shanghai, Bangkok, Yangon, and Manila, are at risk of coastal flooding as sea levels rise. With the cost of natural disasters rise in the near future, cities will become a major battleground in the region's fight against climate change. Then what should be done? To reduce poverty, address climate change stress, and mitigate climate-related disasters, we must focus on building inclusive, green, and resilient cities. First, inclusive growth is key to reduce poverty. Creating inclusive cities means giving the urban poor better access to basic services such as primary health care, education, water, affordable transport, and adequate housing. Inclusive cities should also expand quality job opportunities for the poor. ADB supports such efforts in our developing member countries. For example, in India, we are working with the government to support the National Urban Health Mission efforts to strengthen urban primary health systems. The improved quality of urban health services is expected to benefit about 400 million people, including about 70 million currently living in urban slums. More than half the beneficiaries will be women, since maternal and child health services comprise a large part of urban primary health care. ADB is also firmly committed to supporting India's 100 Smart Cities initiatives. The use of technology and intelligent systems will improve urban services for the poor, including sanitation and affordable transportation. Second, to make cities greener, they must become more energy and resource efficient through promotion of low carbon development and smart use of land and water. They need to invest more in mass public transport systems and better waste and wastewater management. Transport systems need to be better integrated. For example, in Vientiane, Laos, ADB is supporting mass public transportation system, including bus rapid transit linked to cycle and pedestrian pathways. In this way, 700,000 people can easily switch from one mode of transport to another. Another example of ADB's support for green cities is a private sector loan to develop waste-to-energy projects in more than 20 secondary cities across China. As of June 2014, 12 of these plants are already in operation. Together, they can process about 4.6 million tons of household waste annually, generating about 1.3 billion kilowatt hours of on-grid electricity each year. Third, to make cities more resilient, decision makers should always consider natural hazards and climate change risks when designing cities and urban infrastructure. Relatively small upfront investment can save lives and avoid large-scale infrastructure rebuilding costs and rehabilitation costs later. Asia needs to invest more in climate-resilient infrastructure, such as enlarged drainage system in cities, elevated roads, and bigger stormwater retention reservoir to accommodate variations in rainfall. At ADB, all investment projects are screened for climate risks. Those at risk undergo climate impact assessments to ensure we can build, plan, and manage investment that are more resilient. Here, I'd like to mention that ADB supported project in Bangladesh. The Coastal Town Environmental Infrastructure Improvement Project is designed to reduce vulnerability of municipal infrastructure such as water supply, sanitation, solid waste management, and bus terminals to climate change and disaster risks. The project also includes investment in cyclone shelters, emergency access roads and bridges, and stronger homes in slums. Finally, inclusive, green, and resilient cities need better governance and more effective institutions, greater use of integrated urban planning, better use of land, and more timely investment in sustainable and resilient infrastructure are all essential. Cities also need additional funding beyond traditional sources. For example, they can consider the development of new finance instruments to better mobilize local resources, such as municipal bond and public-private partnerships. One example of innovative financing is the use of private equity funds to promote PPPs in the Philippines. The Philippine Investment Alliance for Infrastructure, whose investors comprise ADB, the Philippine Government Pension Fund, and Dutch pension fund managers, and Australian Private Investment Bank, is designed to draw other private funds into infrastructure. In closing, I'd like to commit that ADB will continue to play an important role in the development of inclusive, green, and resilient cities and the success of the SDGs and the global climate change agenda. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to highlight the importance of all that President Nakao has said, and it's really important that Asia, where urbanization, as he mentioned, is taking place at the fastest rate, and we also have some of the biggest challenges. He has not only analyzed the nature of the problem, but also given us a roadmap on how to proceed ahead. So I'd like to request all of you to please give him another hand for his outstanding service. Now, I let the Master of Ceremonies, Relitsa, announce lunch, but I just want to mention that we're very fortunate and grateful that lunch is being hosted by the President of the Asian Development Bank. This will be sponsored by ADB. So please use your resilience to enjoy the lunch. And I'll hand it over to Relitsa now.
Thank you, Dr. Pachauri, and thank you, Mr. Nakao, for all the investment and care for building sustainable cities and continued investment in their future. Thank you very much.